Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for November 13th, 2024. I'm going to be discussing today the Eurozone in crisis. This was triggered especially the day after the US election when the German government fell, when Chancellor Scholz fired one of the coalition partners, Christian Lindner, who was the finance minister from the Free Democratic Party. Lindner was insisting that the zero budget deficit increase be maintained, which is virtually impossible with the expenditure on the Ukraine war unless you have massive cuts in social spending. And so this was unacceptable to Scholz, unacceptable to the Greens. In reality, it's unacceptable to virtually everyone in Germany. But instead of getting rid of the black zero policy, as it's called, they decided to go ahead with massive austerity. So the government fell. A German election was set yesterday. Originally, they were talking about March. The election was scheduled for September of 2025, but now it's going to be February 23rd. Now, there's no clear pathway out of this. The major parties are in decline. The so-called coalition, the traffic light coalition, which is the red, green, yellow, the Free Democrats, the Greens, and the Social Democrats, they can't agree on anything. And they are losing support dramatically. The party that's in the lead now is the Christian Democrats, but they're led by a man named Friedrich Merz, who comes from BlackRock, who's committed to escalation against Russia and Ukraine, sending the Taurus missiles, which is opposed by Scholz, and Scholz has been sticking to his opposition to giving Ukraine these weapons that would reach deep into Russia. The other problem they have is that the parties that are in ascendance, the parties that are growing, are the so-called left party, the Bundeswagenknecht, and the so-called right party, the Alternative for Germany. Now, these labels are useless because what do the AfD and the BSW have in common? Anti-war, no more money for the wars, no conflict with Russia and China, and they're anti-green, therefore production and development. So they could be in an alliance except for the use of the old political profiles that Wagenknecht comes out of the left party. The AfD is supposedly the right-wing extremist party, but actually both of them are committed to the idea of national sovereignty for Germany, which Germany has lost in the present circumstance. And so that's why it's dangerous to have a BlackRock official like Merz coming in as a potential chancellor, especially one who's committed to war. So the fact that Scholz is sticking to opposition to the Taurus missiles, well, that's good. He did say he expects Trump to continue the Biden policy of providing long-range missiles to Germany beginning in 2026. So that's something that will have to be fought out. Now, there's also within the Social Democrats a push to replace Scholz with the defense minister, Pistorius. He's an advocate of making Germany war ready. So you can see that there's a potential for a very serious debate in Germany. Whether the German population is ready for it or not is another question. Now, meanwhile, NATO and the European Union are scrambling as to what to do with the emergence of the Trump presidency in the United States. This has a lot to do with how to continue this war, because the line from NATO and from the leaders of most of the parties of Europe, of the governments in Europe, is that Russia must be stopped. The war must be successful for Ukraine, because if Russia is not stopped, there'll be a domino effect. That is, the Russians will then move into Poland, into the Baltic states, possibly into Germany, and so on. So there's a push, especially from Poland, from Prime Minister Tusk, in collaboration with Starmer of the UK, to figure out how to Europeanize the Ukraine war. And what this means is that soon you'll have a meeting with the Poles, the Brits, Macron, NATO General Secretary Rutte, the Baltic states, and others. Now, the issue, according to Tusk, the Polish Prime Minister, is how Europe can overcome the loss of support from the United States to continue the war. Now, Boris Johnson has once again emerged as a spokesman, or I should say a loudmouth on this. Remember, Johnson was the one in February, or March and April rather, of 2022, shortly after the Russians launched the military operation, that he's the one who put the message out that NATO does not want a ceasefire. NATO does not want the peace agreement that was worked out in Istanbul between Ukraine and Russia. And as a result, in the almost 2 years that have continued after that, we've seen huge losses in Ukraine of manpower, now of power and other infrastructure. And so what right does Boris Johnson have to sound off? Well, that's who Boris Johnson is. And what he said is that if Ukraine doesn't win, there's no stopping the Russians. He said they'll take the Baltic states, and he also said the South China Sea becomes a liability. In other words, the Quad, the idea of a global NATO. So he said if Trump won't support Ukraine, then the United Kingdom will have to send troops to support Ukraine. I wonder how that is accepted by the British military. Probably the military's okay with it. How about the people of the United Kingdom? Do they support that? Now, the obvious point here is that the Europeans are going to try to pressure Trump, to keep Trump in the fight. And this is something that, there's a full court mobilization of the neocons trying to control the appointments to the Trump cabinet. Now, an interesting case is that of the rumors that Marco Rubio, the senator from Florida, and former Trump opponent, would be the nominee for Secretary of State. Rubio, until recently, has never met a war he couldn't support. And he's taken the point, especially on Venezuela, but also against Russia and China. But interestingly, he's put out a report recently on China in which he says that the idea that China's economy is going to collapse is not true, because China has actually reorganized its economy, its approach, and is in fairly good shape. Furthermore, Rubio said Ukraine is lost, the war is lost, and there has to be a settlement. Now, maybe he was doing that as an audition to get into the Trump cabinet. But if he's serious about that, it does represent some rethinking coming from the result of the election of Donald Trump as president. So perhaps this will have an effect on others in the U.S., although the war hawks, especially in the Republican and Democratic Party, wish to continue the war. And for obvious reasons. It's not just about the money for the military-industrial complex. It's about stopping the potential for a new security architecture tied to a new development architecture outside of the control of the dollar and the Anglo-American establishment. So this is going to be an ongoing fight. It will be extremely interesting. What we're doing, what the Schiller Institute is doing to engage in this, is we have on December 7th and 8th a conference which is designed to mobilize the highest quality thinking in the U.S. and the European population on how to proceed from this point forward, ending the wars and moving toward economic cooperation among sovereign states. That's been LaRouche's policy for 40 to 50 years. I'll be including in the description section a link to register for the conference on December 7th and 8th. Then also later today, on Wednesday, I'll have the weekly live discussion with Helga Zepp-LaRouche. You can send your questions for that. Send them to me at harleysch@gmail.com or send them to questions@schillerinstitute.org. So you can get involved. You can be as involved as you want to be. If you want to make sure we break the push toward war and chaos become active with the Schiller Institute, subscribe to the Executive Intelligence Review, and share this video with as many people as you can. So I'll see you later this afternoon when I do the dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche.